How's everyone doing today? We are right in the middle of a little series on the end times and really signs of the last days, and today we're going to continue that. About 3 weeks ago, we really established that the curtain for the end times really opened up. In 70 AD, we know that Israel was conquered by Titus and the Romans. The Great Diaspora began then. In 1917, we know that Israel was called back to their homeland. When Britain took over Palestine, the Balfour Declaration called them home. In 1948, they became a nation. In 1967, they recaptured Jerusalem. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the revived Roman Empire. And that in the last days, Daniel and many other prophets said that Rome would come back together. We believe theoretically that that could be the European Union, could be the United Nations, and we went through all the various theories with that. Today, I really believe it's apropos because of the events that are occurring in Egypt this week, literally go along with what God says would happen in the last days, and we're going to go through that this morning. And really, it's the Psalm 83 battle. How many of you have ever studied that? Psalms 83? Okay. It is very interesting because most people point to the Gog-Magog battle as the next battle, the Ezekiel 37, 38, 39 battle that will sometime take place north of Israel. But I believe there's a preceding battle, and that is the Psalm 83 battle. And there's some fascinating things regarding the nations in that psalm that are going to come against Israel and what's going on today. The major players of the last days, we've talked about these, but it's Israel back in the land. That really opened up the curtain. In fact, throughout the prophets, God said, in the last days, I will draw my people from the four corners of the earth back to their land, the land that I've given them. And so in 1917, not 1948 when they became a nation, but 1917, the prophecies are, I will bring them back. I will gather them from the four corners of the earth. So that's how long ago the end time curtain began. It's pretty amazing stuff. We've talked about Rome and Babylon and the rise of Babylon, this great nation that economically rules the world and imports more goods and services than any other nation on the planet. We talked about a major country in the East, I believe is China, who will oppose the Antichrist government. In Daniel chapters 10 and 11, you can read about that. How even the Antichrist and his global government will be afraid of this king from the East. It's pretty amazing. Today we're going to talk about that alliance of Muslim nations, really that are directly around the nation of Israel today that Psalm 83 talks about, and they are not included in the Gog-Magog conglomeration of nations. So I believe it is apropos that we do that. Find it interesting that today, actually this week with the events that are going on in Egypt and even Lebanon, those are two nations in the Psalm 83 prophecy that have to be against Israel. But we know Egypt has been really an ally of Israel. But now they are fearing that with the government about to be overthrown, that they could take their place in that conglomeration of 10 nations in Psalm 83 that will be against Israel prior to the Gog-Magog battle. Now, if you are lost, just raise your hand and I'll try to explain it a little more. Isaiah 11:12 says, He will lift up a standard for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel and will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. 1917 that began. But let's look at God's promise. In 1946, the white you see on the map to the left is places that Jews occupied. The green are places that Muslims and Palestinians, if you would, occupied. 1947, it changed to that. 1967, God allowed Israel to take back most of their land. And then 1973 to today, we see that God has kept His promise to the Jews. They're back in the land. There can be no partitioning of the land of Israel. In fact, in Joel we read very clearly, and we went over this, that the nations in the last days that attempt to partition or divide the land of Israel will be judged by God. I believe America needs to look out for the roadmap, so-called, to peace, because partitioning the land of Israel is inevitably going to result in judgment from God. Yet every nation in the world is attempting to do that, and we know the stage is set for that false Messiah who will eventually come and bring false peace to the Middle East. All right, today Muslims have declared holy war on Western civilization in Israel. The leader of Jordan's powerful Muslim Brotherhood warned Saturday that unrest in Egypt will spread across the Middle East, and Arabs will topple leaders, any leader or any country in that area that aligns itself with the United States. Hammam Siad's comments were made at a protest outside the Egyptian embassy in Amman, inspired by massive rallies in neighboring Egypt and even Lebanon and even in Jordan and even in New York and Sweden and across the world. We see people are rising up. Folks, I didn't plan that we would be studying this part of our prophecy with the events that are occurring in the world today. I do believe it must be God's providence that we would be exactly here in the week when all of these events are occurring. Further, even Pastor Chris doing his homily on Vanuatu and missions, and then we had our beautiful praise team up here from that representing other worlds. It's just a God thing. I love that. They say that Palestine is their land, but the Quran actually disagrees with them. Did you know that? Okay, I love this, and you might want to write this down. Those are the references in yellow out of the Quran itself. And it says this: Allah says in the Quran that the land of Israel belongs to Jews. And here's the quote: "We inspired Moses and brought the children of Israel across the sea, and truly did allot unto the children of Israel a fixed abode." Speaking of Palestine or Israel. "O my people, go into the land which Allah has ordained for you. Allah's promise was fulfilled for the children of Israel." Even the Quran says that that land belongs to Jews. All right. Muslim Brotherhood, their motto is Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. All right. Now their strongest foothold is in Jordan. Guess what? Jordan is another ally of Israel, but it has to come against Israel probably very soon. Okay, so we're going to watch some amazing things. Here's a movie put out by the Muslim Brotherhood, Jihad Academy. When I was in Jerusalem, we were getting the Bible College for Calvary Chapel started there. Our tour guide was a Palestinian, and I didn't like to go to all the places. Frankly, I grew sick to my stomach looking at the places with the statues of Mary and saints and Catholics literally bowing down and worshiping these statues right in front of my face. So I stopped going on the tours of these places, and I stayed in the bus talking to the Palestinian driver. And I got a chance to witness to him, and with tears in his eyes, we thought all Christians were idolaters. Because all they see are these Catholics worshiping these statues and idols in all the places that you go to visit. Kissing the ground of where they think Jesus might have been laid in the manger. And if you've been there, you've seen all these places. And the relics that people worship rather than worshiping God. So I stayed with him, and he began to tell me that his son was at summer camp. And I'm like, wow, that's great. He goes, yeah, yesterday he learned how to jump out burning building window with AK-47 and come up shooting. Now, his son was 10 years old. Now, if you've kept your finger to the heartbeat of what these children are learning in Muslim schools and in mosques over there in Jordan and Israel and Egypt and Palestine and all over the Middle East, they're learning that Israel is Satan, America is the great Satan, and they are evil and must be destroyed. And they're learning literally songs about the evil Israelites and pigs and all this stuff that he was telling me. Now this is in Palestine. Islam and terrorism, Osama bin Laden, the last quote up there, said, not all terrorism is cursed. Some terrorism is blessed, and we practice good terrorism. Yeah, okay. Wow. We will destroy the great Satan and its puppet, the Jews, from the face of the world. The occupiers will die. You see, throughout mosques around the world today, even in America, there is rhetoric against Western civilization, against Christians, and against Jews. It's interesting they don't pick on any other groups. Zechariah, we know this, chapter 12, verse 2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a trembling cup, or a cup of drunkenness for all the surrounding people, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all the peoples. And all who would heave it away or try to pick it up will surely be cut to pieces, though all the nations of the earth are gathered together against it. In fact, today, every nation that proposes partitioning the land of Israel is against the land of Israel. Do you know that? Joel's clear on that. Today, this prophecy is in complete fulfillment. We have the nations of the world lying together against Israel. I know we've been talking a lot about Iran and their nuclear program, and now they've just dispatched in the past week fighter vessels into the ocean surrounding that area there. But today I really want to look at the Psalm 83 war. I really believe on the prophetic timetable, it is the next event that will occur. We need to keep our eyes closely peeled on the Middle East, which the whole world is. You turn on CNN or Fox News, all they're doing is showing the Middle East and all the things that are going on there today. This is a prophecy missed by many, yet I really believe it's important because there's some really interesting stuff. Conflicts today that apply to the Psalm 83 prophecy is Lebanon. Remember a couple of weeks ago, the government was overthrown, and now a Hezbollah-based government is taken over, backed by Syria and Iran. It's no accident, in my opinion, that Egypt's government now is being overthrown, and I believe the Muslim Brotherhood out of Jordan has a lot to do with that because of the statement they made. Any country that supports the United States of America or is an ally of the United States, the government must be overthrown. How are they going to do that? By unrest in the streets by the people. And we find that happening today. All right, Psalm 83, if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. If not, it's up on the screen. Starting at verse 2, For behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, Come, let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel would be remembered no more. In fact, I've heard transcripts from various sermons in mosques around the world almost quoting that verbatim. Of course, they don't know they're quoting the book of Psalms, but exactly what God prophesied is the exact rhetoric that's being spewed from the pulpits of these mosques by the imams. For they have conspired together, verse 5, with one mind against you they make a covenant. The tense, and here's the nations that are part of this conspiracy against Israel. The tents of Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagrites, Gebel, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, and the inhabitants of Tyre. Assyria is also joined with them, and they have become a help to the children of Lot. Selah, think about this. Okay, this is a conglomeration of nations that have never conspired together in its totality before. Psalm 83 describes the same war as Isaiah 17. Now, you know we have talked about Isaiah 17, and especially Syria, because Syria is part of the Psalm 83 nations. In fact, well, we're going to get there in a minute, but it's pretty amazing how the whole world is lined up exactly as the Bible predicted it would be in the last days. All right. This alliance of those 10 nations, the Psalm 83 nations, has never occurred in history before. But it will occur very soon as the two missing nations jump on board. Who are those? Egypt and Jordan. Okay. Let's see what the countries that make up the alliance. Okay, the tents of Eden, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagrites. Well, I already went over that. There's the list, and that's the modern counterparts today. They are the immediate nations that surround the nation of Israel today. So the tents of Edom are the Palestinians and South Jordanians. The Ishmaelites are the Saudis. Moab is Palestinians and Central Jordanians. In fact, the Muslim Brotherhood, probably we could say, is mainly made up of Moabites. The Hagrites or Hagarenes are Egyptians. Gebel is Hezbollah and North Lebanon. Ammon is Palestine and North Jordan. Amalek is Arabs of the Sinai Peninsula area. Philistia is the Gaza Strip, the exact area. Interesting how Palestinians, not Jews, control that area, and God knew it and prophesied that Philistia would still be against Israel. That's why Israel could not have taken the Gaza Strip yet. Very interesting. Tyre, which is South Lebanon and that area just to the north of Israel. Assyria are the Syrians, and northern Iraq, or parts of Iraq and Syria. Very interesting stuff. So those are the Psalm 83 nations. Not one of those nations are in the Ezekiel 37, 38, 39, Gog, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, the nations that will come with Russia, I believe, against Israel. They are all different, and they have never been together fully in its totality against Israel, yet we know it has to occur. That's why we believe it's the next event on the prophetic timeline. All those nations we need to watch very closely. All right, 7 wars have been really waged against Israel since they became a nation. In 1948 was the War of Independence. Syria, Egypt, and Jordan attacked Israel, but not the rest of the nations. Can't be the Psalm 83 conglomeration. The second one was Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal and cuts off Israel from access to Red Sea ports. And there was unrest with Israel and Egypt. 1967, they were attacked again by Syria, Egypt, and Jordan, and it's then that they retook Jerusalem. 1973, the Yom Kippur War, they were attacked by Syria and Egypt. The Gulf War in 1990, they were attacked by Iraqi missiles. The South Lebanon War, 2006, you remember that, when UN had to keep peacekeepers on the border between Israel and Lebanon, and they kept throwing missiles back and forth. Next will be, in my opinion, the Psalm 83 War. That is when Syria, Egypt, Palestinians, Lebanon, parts of Jordan, and all those immediate surrounding nations that we just went over will attack Israel. Okay. I don't know about you, but it's interesting stuff. We know that Turkey had to be aligned with Russia, but they're not part of this alliance, Psalm 83. Neither is Iran. Let me throw out a speculation. Could be that Syria or the Lebanese to the north, the Hezbollah, will attack Israel. Israel will retaliate. Syria will step in with more support. Israel will retaliate again and wipe out Damascus. We know prophetically in the last days, Damascus has to be destroyed. That's the capital of Syria. That will start the Psalm 83 war. So all these surrounding nations will then attack Israel. Israel will prevail, and that will be the hook that draws Russia, Turkey, Iran, and the Gog Magog Ezekiel war that we know is going to take place into the battle, and all of it will then come to a head. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So there's a map. Israel's in the yellow in the middle. Is it yellow up there? It's kind of light green. That small little country that has only been alive really since 1948, God has preserved amidst every attack that has come against it. That is a miracle, folks. You see, this is one of the proofs that the God of the Bible is real. Fulfilled prophecy. Folks, there's no question we are living in the last days. 1917, the last day curtain began. Do not let anybody tell you, well, hey, come on. People have said that for thousands of years. Since John wrote the book of Revelation. Well, yeah, Israel was still dispersed. We couldn't have been in the last days prior to 1917. We could not have been. The last days began in 1917. It's time to get serious about God. It's time to shine bright the light of Jesus Christ to those that we know. It is miraculous. Some question if the Hagarites are indeed the Egyptians. Genesis chapter 16:1, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, so she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. We know that all Arabs claim to be from descendants of Abraham, some through Ishmael, some through Abraham's Jewish descendants. What's his name? I'm having a brain fade. And anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Isaac, yeah, thank you. All right. Hagar is the Egyptian maid where that he got pregnant, and her descendants, folks, are Egyptian. Are you with me? Hagarites are Egyptians. Okay. So, some say the Psalm 83 war has already taken place in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, where we have some kingdoms invade King Jehoshaphat's reign, about 872 to 848 BC. But not all the nations of Psalm 83 were a part of that invasion. It could not have been fulfilled. Frankly, it has not. Psalm 83 is a prophecy that has not been fulfilled yet, but I believe what is going on in Egypt today is setting the stage for Psalm 83. King Abdullah II of Jordan has publicly stated that he thinks Jordan's treaty with Israel is a mistake. Remember, two nations need to get in line against Israel, Jordan and Egypt. It's pretty amazing that in Jordan today, the common people on the street are against Israel. They think all their problems are the result of Israel. He has clearly been more critical of Israel lately, lobbying the U.S., Egypt, and others against Jews. Some observers believe he's looking for a way to break the treaty. If hostilities break out, I wouldn't be surprised if he joins quickly against Israel. In fact, just this morning before church, I was trying to look at some breaking news. And the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, that's where they're really stationed, are calling for all Muslims to rise up against governments that are aligned with Israel or the United States. Okay. We could see what's going on in Egypt break out in Jordan, and even Lebanon just a couple of weeks ago, they already overthrew that government. All right. Egypt, Isaiah 19, 1 through 22, really talked about Egypt in the last days. How they will be against Israel, but eventually these nations are going to accept Israel. I believe that could be a reference to the second coming of Christ and his millennial kingdom. We know that Egypt in the last days would be really an insignificant kingdom, right? The Ezekiel prophecy in 29 there. Egypt, well, I'm just skipping a few things. All right. A fundamental change in the government of Egypt may lead to a revolution in Israel's security doctrine. A defense official told Ynet, it's a news service, Friday night. Ynet.com is where I got this. As protests against President Issam Marbaruk's rule continue to intensify, Israel's really concerned about this. In fact, they can't see that the next government in Egypt will be pro-Israel. All right, Isaiah 17:1, Syria, the other nation, and we've talked about this, the burden against Damascus. Behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, and it will be a ruinous heap. We know that Damascus is the oldest perpetually populated city in the world. It has always been a city. It's never been destroyed, meaning this prophecy has never been fulfilled. Reading through Isaiah 17, you get the same nations, pronouncements against the nations that are listed in the Psalm 83 prophecy. Very interesting stuff. So it all kind of goes together. Syria is organizing a summit of Arab nations to join together against Israel. I believe that it's the Psalm 83 configuration that is going to be most profound. The world is polarizing. Okay, Cairo, Egypt. Arab foreign ministers from 22 nations, a League of Arab Nations, condemned the aggression against Iraq, called for immediate withdrawal of the United States and British troops, and at that meeting, they purposed in their heart to oppose the United States and Israel. Okay? Very interesting. Okay. Sorry, I've got a lot of information. I'm trying to get through it quick, so I'm just thinking. Today, with riots in the streets of Cairo threatening to oust the president from his 30-year reign, the man who wants to replace him is the former head of the IAEA, the vice president. Okay, notice this guy. He shielded the Iranian nuclear weapons programs for years. He's been having the Muslim Brotherhood support him, and he is possibly the one, if the current president of Egypt steps down, that will become the president. If he does, Egypt will fall into this alliance of nations against Israel. We need to carefully watch this. It's pretty amazing stuff. Israel has 4 borders: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, right? Okay, also you can count the Mediterranean. Turkey controls the Mediterranean. Turkey has already aligned itself against Israel. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. We will see these nations come together in an alliance against Israel. It's no accident that the government of Lebanon fell a few weeks ago, and now the government of Egypt is falling. I think it could line up and be preparing the way for this prophecy to be fulfilled. We live, indeed, in exciting times. We have done surveys in Egypt, Tunisia, Lebanon, Jordan. When we were in Israel, our Bible college there is made up of Palestinian Christians, not Jewish believers. And we spent a lot of time in the coffee shops in the Palestinian areas. And you hear the speech. They are red in the face, angry against Jews. They are at a drop of a hat ready to kill all the Jews. If they think you're a Zionist, they will hurt you. So I had to be careful with Zionist language around them when I witnessed to them. Even the Palestinian Christians will have nothing to do with Jewish Christians. Did you know that? Okay. Calvary Chapel, I might get some feedback from this, but I welcome it. Anyone that wants to email me. When we were there, I tried to bring peace between the Palestinian Christian leaders in Jerusalem and the Calvary Chapel Jewish Christian leaders. We had a lunch meeting set up. We came to that meeting, and the Jewish leaders came in. I was with the Palestinian Christian leaders. When they came in, all of a sudden, the look on the Palestinian Christian leaders' faces turned rock hard. And I started talking about how Christians were brothers. And literally, after 5 minutes of banter and interaction, they both stood up from the table, slammed their fists down, and said, "This will never happen," and left. Pretty amazing. Okay. Now, true Christians, that wouldn't happen. But that occurred just not too long ago. Well, it was a few years ago now. All right, God told us this would happen in the last days. The Arab Agenda, yesterday a message was given at the most notable mosque in the Middle East. I always go to this mosque website because they have it in English. And they've been saying this for a long time, but just yesterday they said it again. Jihad must be waged until Israel and America are destroyed and their allies, to go on, Britain. Isn't it interesting that Britain and America and Israel still are holding on together? Well, that goes with what we talked about a few weeks ago. All right, the big bear of the north. He is aligned with Syria, but they will not enter the battle until, I believe, Damascus is destroyed, and that will be the hook that Ezekiel prophesied would draw them into this war. That will occur after this Psalm 83 war that's about to take place. Syria, warned by the U.S., if Syria continues bringing guns and supplies to Iraq, we will consider it a hostile act and is bringing the supplies combatants. We've said that to the Iranians. We've said that to the Syrians that are helping the rebels in Iraq today. We see the world polarizing to the way God predicted it would. In Amos chapter 1, it says, Syria will come against Israel 4 times, and on that 4th time, Damascus will be destroyed. The first time they came against Israel was 1948. The second was 1967. The third was 1973. And the fourth could happen really any time. All right. I'm skipping some stuff. All right. This is where it gets really interesting. Here's why I wanted to take a moment. Can you see that at all? All right. This is a list of all the nations in the Middle East. All the Gog-Magog nations from Ezekiel and all the Psalm 83 nations. These are at the top, going across the top. And what I'm going to have to do is post this. You can download it. Are all the wars that have been waged. See the very one on the right? That's the Gog-Magog war. The one next to it is the Psalm 83 war. Those in green are the nations that come against Israel. Notice the Psalm 83 nations. Can you see that right here? Okay. These nations are the ones we just covered in Psalm 83, are not in the Ezekiel prophecy for the Gog-Magog war. Exactly those nations. I find that interesting. Here's the other thing. Iraq. See this? Is not in either war. Parts of Iraq are listed in the Psalm 83, but not Babylon, not the capital of Iraq. And it's interesting, they are not in either war. Why? I believe because we occupy Iraq. Iraq right now really is controlled by the United States. And how did the prophets know that in the last days Iraq would be excluded from these wars? Well, it's because Babylon is being controlled by the United States. Okay, so this is where it lines up, and that is fascinating to me. It's also fascinating that these Gog-Magog nations do not take part in the Psalm 83 war that takes place just prior to that. So I will post that so you can go through it. I got this from a website. They did the research, and I borrowed it and just confirmed it. But it's a great graphic. So I'll post that for you. All right. Psalm 83. What's next prophetically? I think we're going to see this alignment of nations come against Israel. And eventually war will break out. When will it happen? I don't know. But we need to watch Palestinians, South Jordanians, the Saudis, Central Jordanians, the Egyptians, Lebanon, the Sinai Strip, the Gaza Strip, Syria, and parts of Iraq, because they will align themselves against Israel and they will be destroyed. Not completely destroyed. That will be the hook that draws the big bear of the north down against Israel and the other configuration of nations that aren't listed in the Psalm 83. the Gog Magog, Ezekiel 37-38 nations. All right. That's the Gog Magog battle, and we're going to cover that next week. It really talks about all the nations that align with Russia against Israel, and the final battle, in my opinion, that is the catalyst for the false Messiah, the Antichrist, to come on the scene and finally bring peace, false peace, to the Middle East. It is all lining up, folks. I mean, the world is lined up exactly as the Bible said it would be in the last days. People are doing exactly what the Bible said they would do in the last days. 2 Timothy 3. Men will be lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness but denying the power. In Romans, men will burn with passion for men and women with women. That's a sign of the last days. There will be those that abandon the Word of God, the apostate church, and start teaching philosophies of man and human wisdom and the tickling of the ears rather than the Word of God. Folks, I don't know about you, but I look around and the hair on the back of my neck just stands up because it's like, wow, Lord, your Word is true. The alignment of nations are happening, and when Jordan and Egypt get on board with where they're supposed to be, folks, everything is lined up exactly as the Bible predicted. Everything. We are close. Now's the time to live right, to do things to build God's kingdom, to get excited about the Lord and what He's doing in that spider. Do you see him right here? Building a web? Right there. You probably can't see him because the spotlight silhouettes him interesting. The enemy. You see it now? Oh, okay. All right. Romans 13, I want to close with this. Worship team, come on up. And someone, Victoria's here. Good. Romans 13, 11, and 12. Do this knowing the time, that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us than when we first believed. The night is almost gone. The day is near. Therefore, let us lay aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Amen? I want to be that armor of light kind of Christian. Can I get help with the podium? Does someone want to move it? Scoot it way over there? Before we do our closing song, I love to do weddings.